season starts here, the Vancouver Boat Show.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're just waiting for attendees to gather, and then we'll get started shortly. Thanks for your patience in the meantime. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started in just a few moments. Thanks for your patience. All right, it looks like our attendee number has stabilized, so let's get this show on the road. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and welcome to the VIBS, the Vancouver International Boat Show, sponsored by Freedom Marine International Yacht Sales in Vancouver. I'm your moderator, Bobby. Please reach out to me in the chat box if you experience any technical issues, and I'll do everything that I can from my end to help you out. On another note, during the presentation, if you think of any questions you'd like to ask or comments you'd like to share, please type them in the Q&A box, and then we'll read them out after the presentation. And this brings us to the part that we're all waiting for. It is a great pleasure to introduce to you and present Aubrey Millard and Living the Dream, Haida Gwaii and Vancouver Island West Coast.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This picture here is basically what we're going to be doing today. We are going to be visiting Haida Gwaii, then going back over to the mainland to Calvert Island, and then down to Cape Scott, and then we go down the west coast of Vancouver Island, ending up at the Esquimalt. So this is our tour for today. This is the boat that we're going to be using. It's called Volata 4. It's an Ontario 32, and we're quite happy with this boat. We've crossed the Atlantic Ocean with it and spent time in the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, and gone all up and down both the east and west coast. Right now, the boat is on the hard in Mexico, waiting for the borders to open after the COVID scare finishes up. This is our entry into the area of Haida Gwaii. This is Queen Charlotte City. If you remember, the Haida Gwaii was originally called the Queen Charlotte Island. And so we navigated our way into, and we anchored here at a place called Bearskin Bay. And this gave us easy access with our dinghy to go into the main town dock here. And then there was a good road system in the northern part. In the southern part, there are no roads. All of the locations in the south are by water only. This is the entrance at Queen City, pardon me, I'm thinking of the yacht club. This is the one for Haida Gwaii, and it's Queen Charlotte City. Now, they have these systems set up. These are tidal grids. What happens is the boats go along these grids at high tide, wait for the tide to go out, and they settle down on the bottom. They've got lines ashore so they don't tip over. And then this gives the people the opportunity to clean the bottom and do other maintenance work in between tides. So they've got, several hours to get all that work done. And Bearskin Bay is a very active lumbering location. And so here is a barge taking the timbers out of the water and loading them on this big barge for transport down to other lumber yards. We rented a car, though, while we were in the Queen Charlotte City, and went up to the old Masset. This is the original town on the island, up in the northern part. And at one point in time, it was also a small radio base for the Canadian Navy. And they had an interesting museum there. And I saw a picture of these old ships. They were called gate boats. And I remember this was in July 1985, and I was probably on one of those boats because I was active with the Navy at that point in time. And I remember going up to Masset in these. It starts to give you an awareness that you are getting old when you see things that you use being featured in a museum. Now, this is a diagram of what an original Haida town would have looked like in the 1800s. It was usually located on the water, and you have all of these longhouses that were for group get-together or family and clan locations. They had a wide variety of totem poles. Some of them this would be the chieftain's totem pole. Some of them are frontal poles that are just out in front of the longhouses. When you see a pole like this with the stripes on it, that indicates the number of potlatches that were held in that particular village. And so the more potlatches you had, the higher status and also the older that the village is. And so this is an example of one of the actual totem poles in Old Masset. The interesting thing about this totem pole, though, is that the First Nations villages were badly decimated when the white man went up for lumbering and mining and fishing. And this started in about the mid-1800s. And unfortunately, disease went rampant through the First Nations people. And from 1860 to 1890, these villages that originally would have had, say, 300 to 500 people each in each village were decimated so that only about 20 or 30 people were surviving in the village. A horrible situation. And what then happened is that some of the First Nations groups and some of the religious groups and some of the other citizens of Queen Charlotte City got together and said, we've got to try to bring these survivors from these villages up because they just cannot survive in their original form. And so they were brought up to Masset and to Skidegate and to Queen Charlotte City and relocated there. But there has not been a new totem pole since 1890 until this totem pole was erected in 1969, pardon me. And so this is very characteristic of the First Nations totem pole. Here's another one. They had, this is the Raven clan. That's why the symbol at the top is there. And so this is a new pole, another new pole in Masset. Skidegate itself is a small community just outside of Queen Charlotte City. And they have the Haida Heritage Museum there. And so they built a series of these longhouses, and each longhouse has a frontal totem pole to indicate its clan affiliation. And the clans were of these natures. They were the crows and ravens, bears, otter, and sea urchins. And these were the standard clans that were in that area. Now, each of these totem poles were representing their frontal pole for a longhouse. And at one point in time, there was a bit of competition as they construct these poles for the Heritage Museum. And the interesting question was, which pole is going to be the tallest? And so this was quite characteristic. At the top of each pole, they have 3 watchmen keeping a lookout for the community. But this particular enterprising pole wanted to make the highest pole possible. So they took and put an extra small pole on top of the hat of one of the watchmen, so it claimed being the tallest pole in the actual Heritage Museum. And this was another totem pole that they are in the process of erecting. It's probably been erected now. We did this back in 2011, 2012, wasn't it, Judy?
Yeah.
Now, in order to go down through Haida Gwaii, you need to have a permit. And you get that permit from a heritage center. And you have to undergo a kind of orientation course so that you know what to expect. Because doing it as we were, by ourselves, with our own boat, with our own dinghy, is very precarious, to put it mildly. Many people go down there with eco tours and other tours that conduct you through. But we were doing this totally on our own. And the watchmen were at each of the areas down in Haida Gwaii. And when you went alongside, frankly, you weren't going alongside because there are no docks at any of these locations in Haida Gwaii. They are all original locations, and you've got to find a way of getting ashore, and you report into the watchman at that location. And these watchmen will then be quite happy to then talk to you and show you around. The watchmen were often in what they call a 6-pole longhouse. Okay, this was a traditional longhouse that was built in the 1800s and earlier for First Nations, and it's called a 6-pole longhouse because they have 6 major structural poles on it. And it was interesting the way in which they had their mortar joists here, and they put the whole thing up without using, hammer and nails to any great extent. And all of these longhouses originally had a frontal totem pole portraying whatever symbols they wanted associated with the clan. So this is an example of one of the longhouses that the watchman would use. So they would have 1 or 2 watchmen. They're volunteers, First Nation volunteers, that spend the summer in these longhouses. And the longhouses are used for not only their residents, but group activities and that. And so this is the inside of one of these 6-pole longhouses. And so there's sufficient room inside for small groups to get together, spend overnight, things of that nature. So it could be a very interesting and educational opportunity for groups. Well, now we go down into some of the areas, and these are UNESCO heritage site aspects. They had to put it under protection because what they found is that once people started touring and coming up and visiting, they were swiping, stealing some of these very important heritage arguments. And so the watchmen take very good care of making sure that none of them are defaced or that. When a totem pole is created and mounted, it is left. It is never changed. They do not repaint it. They do nothing. They allow it to just degenerate within the own environmental situations. And this is the remains of a chieftain's longhouse. Again, you can see the poles that were originally part of the roof structure. And these poles, these are probably 200-year-old situations. Now some of them are lying down, totem poles. Some of them are still suspended. And here's one where you see these rings that represented the potlatches that were held by the First Nations groups. Again, this is another chieftain's area where the poles are still available. Now, this shows the original joisting that they used in some of those longhouses. But these are the totem poles, are in very good shape for their age, and the watchman will go along and explain the symbols on some of these totem poles. There were, in addition to the chieftain's totem poles and frontal totem poles, there were what were called mortuary totem poles to commemorate the deaths of chieftains or other important people within the community. This, I believe, was the mortuary totem pole. Now, this is a diagram of the original village in Skedden, and they anticipate that there were up to 26 longhouses in that particular village, and these black dots represent the totem poles that were out in front and the village used as a symbol. But as I say, that village would have been decimated by disease and would have gone from a population of 300 or 400 people within a span of 40 years down to only 10 or 20 or 30 people left remaining. And it's almost horrendous to think of what those people would have gone through as their population was dying off. This is the entrance to the open water from one of the villages here. At high tide, they would have their canoe dragged up above the high tide line, and they would have a hard time getting through there at low tide, but when the next tide came up, they would have easy access to it. Incidentally, this also created a bit of difficulty for us having access in our own dinghy, because we would have to anchor off and bring the dinghy in and contact the watchman from there. And here's another one of the totem poles with, again, the stripes indicating the number of potlatches that community held at one point in time. Then many of the watchmen were extremely good carvers, and so they would make some of these small symbols that they would have outside of their own watchman offices. Now, this shows as we go down, we went into several different spots, and each location would have a watchman and a few totem poles, and they were also very good pathways going through some of the forested areas. And you have a lot of old growth still there. This is one of the Sitka spruce trees that they had in their forest. And you can see they would have a bit of a path, and we were free to wander those paths, or that the watchman would show us the basic area and then say, you know, help yourself, stay as long as you wish, have a good time, kind of thing. But the forests were quite impressive, especially the moss that was there. I think these are a semi-tropical or temperate rainforest area. And so there is a lot of vegetation, but a lot of moss and greenery on the growth of the trees and also on the forest floor. This is Judy again between Sitka spruce. And we went further on down, went into this Coffin Inlet. Some of these channels were very difficult to negotiate, and you had to again be aware of what the currents were. We went out to this one called Windy Bay, and it was. And so we then went over here to this hot spring island. And again, it is a hot spring on that island. But what happened is that they did not have the full tanks because they had an earthquake there a few years ago. And so what they did instead, the water was still coming out, but their tanks were all destroyed. And so they made plastic barrels and poured hot water into the barrels. And so the watchman would fill that barrel for you and you could have yourself a bit of a soak in the hot water of a particular barrel. However, the difficulty is that how do you get your dinghy ashore? Because you don't know exactly how long you're going to be ashore for, and you don't want to have to haul it up above the high tide and then haul it down across the rocks at low tide. So it's always a bit of a gamble as to where you leave your dinghy. And so we left our dinghy up about here with an anchor. But when we came, it was lower tide and way out. So Judy volunteered to wade out and try to bring the dinghy inshore for us. While we were there, we went to another island down the southern tip of it. And here is Judy collecting what we call sea asparagus. Is that what it's called, Judy?
I think so.
Yeah. And it's very tasty. It's a bit on the salty side, and it is a very good adjunct to a wide variety of meals. There's another carving that was in the forested area near one of the watchmen's houses. Then we went from Hot Spring down here into Island Bay and through this Burnaby Narrow. This was a very precarious narrow to go through, but Judy and I enjoy exploring these things. We could have been easy and gone away around this way, but we waited for the appropriate tide to go through the narrows. Now we're getting down to the southern end of it now. That was the set of narrows that we went through, and they actually had guideposts going through it, but it was still a fairly difficult passage. And we had to make sure that it was at high tide, because at low tide there were rocks showing all over the place. Now we then went from that area of Burnaby Narrows over to towards the mainland to a place called Calvert Island. And that was a 130-mile passage. It took us 26 hours to make that passage. When we're on a passage, especially if it's going to be more than overnight, we anticipate a speed of about 5 knots. So that we take a look at 130 nautical miles divided by 5, and we then know the number of hours that we expect it to take. And the other thing that you have to calculate is you want to arrive at your next destination in daylight hours. And so you have to use those kind of calculations. But in doing this, we are now saying goodbye to Haida Gwaii, and we're going over. But a couple of comments here is that Haida Gwaii and the First Nations are very strongly opposed to any oil development. And so we saw a few posters like this around and like that. In fact, these posters would be outside of, private homes and that. So there was a lot of opposition against the tankers. I am sympathetic to the tankers, frankly, because I think that Alberta is being really hamstrung by many of the regulations. And one of them is this regulation on the tanker ban. Tankers are not allowed to transit this area, whatever. So that means that Prince Rupert and Kitimat are not able to transport oil or liquefied natural gas from their locations. And so that totally hamstrings Alberta from being able to get their oil to the coast. But we went down now. This is in Calvert Island. And Calvert Island has an organization called the Hakai Institute. And this is the anchorage here. You're able to come alongside with your dinghy and that, but they don't want any of your boats alongside. And we went there because I had the son of my niece. That's
Great nephew.
a great nephew, is that what you call it? Anyway, he's working there. And this is the Hakai Institute that they use. It used to be a large resort, but it was then taken over by the Hakai Institute. It's an environmental group. And so here is my great nephew, is it?
Yeah.
And at the Hakai Institute. But the Calvert Island has a lot of lovely beaches like this. And you'll see a lot of these beaches too on the west coast of Vancouver Island, especially down in the Tofino and Eupula areas. We had a chance to go out with some of these people doing their research. And so on this particular activity, they were dragging this particular cove and then looking at what they caught in it. And they would do this every few years to just see how the fish life has changed. And so what they would do is that they would take and they would haul the fish out, and then they would actually count the fish and measure the fish. And they then kept a very careful recording of the numbers and fish that they caught, the type and the length of them. And then they would compare these year after year to see any changes in the sea life. This was an interesting part of their, I guess this was on the west coast of Calvert Island. And you'll see this in many west coast communities where the logs have washed up. But my friend, who was my great nephew, he had a activity that he enjoyed doing, where they would take a loose rope and tie it off different logs, and then see if they could rope walk on that loose rope. So here is Dan having a rough time. One of the other ladies, though, was a little bit more agile in managing that kind of a loose rope. So here we are again on those lovely beaches outside of Calvert Island, on the west coast of Calvert Island. And we're now getting ready to head over to Vancouver Island. And so we didn't have to go back out this entrance. We were able to cut around through a narrow channel and go straight down. Now, this island was 72 nautical miles from the northern tip of Vancouver Island. And again, in doing that, we have to do our calculations. So we expected it would take about 14 hours to do that. But we also wanted to make sure that we were rounding Cape Scott in daylight hours, because the Cape Scott is a very bothersome location because of the waves and current pattern. The wave pattern coming right across the Pacific, and the currents, and the wind pattern going around that particular promontory. In fact, Wagner's guide said, "Look out, this is a very difficult location, and so you better be very careful." In fact, let me read what the Wagner guide says about it. Okay, this is Cape Scott, and the Wagner guide says, "Cape Scott is exposed to weather and current and to seas that could have begun thousands of miles away. It is the most significant landmark on the circumnavigation of Vancouver Island, one of the events that marked a complete northwestern boatman. At their worst, Cape Scott seas have capsized and sunk substantial vessels. Even quiet days can be uncomfortable, the result of swells that sweep in from the Pacific to meet colliding currents." So with that kind of background, we wanted to make sure that we were there in daylight hours. Now, when we are making these kind of chain transits, overnight transit, again, there were only the two of us on board, and so we have a watch system. And let me read to you an excerpt from one of my logs describing this, because we did this on an overnight passage. And night sailing can be beautiful if you've got settled conditions. If you've got rough conditions, it can be pretty horrendous and terrifying. But we had good weather coming down here, and I enjoyed my night watch. And so here's what I wrote in my log about this transit. "It was good to be on a quiet night passage again. We double reefed the main just before sunset at 21:17 as a safety precaution. We used our normal watch system, whereby Judy goes to bed shortly after supper from about 18 or 1900 to 2400, or when I get tired. She then takes up to the middle watch from midnight until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, when I then get up and take over once again. As a result, I had the watch on the darkest of a starry night and the glory of a morning sunrise. The night was clear, and I was entranced looking up at the stars as the Leda made her way south through the quiet sea. The night sky on a sailboat provides a spectral black canopy illuminated with millions of stars as we sail cocoon in Veleda across the vast expanse of the ocean. Night sailing is one of the many natural highs I enjoy, especially when conditions are settled. The wind eased off, and I furled the Genoa at 0453 and continued motoring with the main still up. As we approached Cape Scott at 0607, the seas were calm, with a few wispy clouds in the brightening sky. The sun, still below the horizon, illuminated the underside of the cloud with a pale pink wash. And it reflected on a placid, wine-dark sea. The Cape was in sight as we continued to motor sail beneath this colorful panorama of sea and sky. As we got closer, I saw a sea lion breaking the surface of the tranquil water. So that when we left, we actually saw a couple of orcas in the daylight in the afternoon. And then this was the sunset or the sunrise that we had. And it was beautiful as we were rounding the Cape. Here's the Cape. Here's the Cape right here, and we're rounding it. And then looking back, and you can see what I call the wine dark sea. However, if you remember the aphorism, red sky at night, sailor's delight. Red sky in the morning, sailors take warning. So we didn't want to go very far down the coast. So we hunkered into a small area here and anchored off for the night. It was a protected shelterage. I'm trying to remember what the name of that was.
I think it was Anchor Cove, Otter Cove.
Yes, Otter Cove. And so it was an organized cove. They had lumbering active there and fishing. And there were actually some mooring buoys that we could tie up to. As we went around through there, the sky darkened and we went in a big rain squall. And we had rain and heavy weather for the next few days. So that aphorism of red sky in the morning, sailors take warning, was appropriate. Then from there, we went down into Quasino Sound. Now, as you can see, Vancouver Island has a whole series of sounds going down. Quasino, which is the first one we went into. Next was Quaiquot, Nootka, Clayoquot, and Barkley Sound. And each of these sounds are large indentations of inlets and bays that you could spend an entire summer just in one sound, enjoying it, exploring it, fishing, canoeing. There aren't too many organized campsites there. So you have to do it mostly on your own. So anyway, once we got around Cape Scott, we stopped at, as I say, we stopped at Seattle Cove, and then we went up into Quasino Sound. And in the place there, the first place we stopped at, Winter Harbor, there were a lot of fishermen there, and so here are the kind of fish that they caught. I'm not a fisherman, so I wasn't very active in that. But these guys had a fair amount of success. And so that was their catch for the morning. We were in there by noon hour, and they had already gotten these fish and had them cleaned up and ready to go. However, there are the fish farms. And in Quasino Sound itself, there are 5 major fish farms. And this is one of the different. The First Nations group are deathly against the fish farm, and I tend to agree. They create a lot of pollution because these are open water farms, and having the fish penned up into those pens does create a fair amount of pollution and disease on other fish. But BC at that point in time had hundreds of fish farms. This is a representation. All of those yellow dots represent fish farms. And you can see the dots that they had up here in this particular bay that we were in. so that I think they are trying to curtail them now, because again, we're looking at something that was 8 years ago. But it was unfortunate. And the other thing too is that these fish farms would be in some of the nice little bays where you would love to go and anchor and explore the shoreline with your dinghy. But the fish farm occupied acres and acres of water. And so here's one of the First Nations opposition to fish farms, because it's killing off the salmon fishery. Then we went up to Cole Harbor in the end inside that Quatsino Sound, and they have a very nice marina set up there. And here's one of their more modern type totem poles that they had for it. But the other thing about Cole Harbor is that it used to be a RCAF base for the flying boat during World War II. They had flying boats established in several areas of the BC coast to direct it from the any possible enemy incursion. However, these have now been taken over privately and by First Nations, and they are used to store boats or have a little museum. Many of the people fly in, and so they have this tractor that will then haul the seaplane up on land on separate trolleys. Inside the museum, some of the boats are stored there for the winter time, and there's a small museum in one of them. While we were there, we had lots of rain, and so I took this picture. This is taken inside our cockpit. This is our enclosure that we have. But the other interesting thing is in the upper part of our hard bimini, I have a limber hole, and I have a hose coming down, and I can take and put that hose into a jerry can and fill it up with water. So we had a good supply of fresh water thanks to the heavy rains that we had for several days. We went down from Quatsino Sound, and we stopped in along these areas going around Cape Cook. Cape Cook is another one of those capes where you have some very heavy weather possibility, and you have to be very careful when you're going around those. We still like being close inshore, and we went between the cape and an island off the cape, and because we had reasonably good weather. But that's kind of tricky depending upon the conditions. Then we went up into the Bunsby Island here. And then from the Bunsbys, we went on down to, this is the Nootka Sound down here. In one of the areas, we saw this lumbering industry, so that here you have the tug hauling an empty barge, and they're going to take that barge up to a lumbering site and load it up with lumber and then take it down to the next sawmill. We went down to a place called Queen Cove, and it was a nice little bay and anchorage, but it was one of those deserted Indian villages. These houses were probably set up there sometime in the last 50 years, reasonably modern homes, but the economy died and the First Nations people moved out. So I always find it interesting to go along some of these ancient areas. Here was the remains of their church that was there. And so we went alongside with our dinghy on this timber mooring, and we went ashore to just see. All the houses were open. Some of them were badly damaged. Some of them were in good repair. Most of the windows were bashed in. However, they had a very good blueberry patch. So here is Judy helping herself to a good feast of blueberries.
Actually, blackberries.
Are they
I
blackberries?
thought it was blackberries, but
Yeah, okay.
yeah, they're blackberries.
Then from there, we went up. I like going up into these various inlets. And so we went up to Zabalas and over to Cassis. The difficulty with these inlets is there's no anchorages there until you get up to these communities and hopefully go alongside, because the cliffs are so steep and there is no shallows area to be able to anchor. So we went through these areas. We went up to Zabalas, went alongside the town dock. It wasn't a very interesting town. So we then went and down to Tahiti. And there we had an interesting difficulty because we went to the marina and we called the marina on VHF, no answer. Called them on cell phone, no answer. We went along outside the marina and we could not find a human being walking on the docks or anybody to ask, how do we get in? Where can we locate? And so we wound up going back out to a loading dock that you're supposed to only be there for 4 hours. But at that point in time, it was getting near dark. We couldn't go anyplace else. And we didn't want to get stranded going down these inlets in the dark. So we went alongside the loading dock, and spent overnight there, even though we weren't supposed to. Now here we are at Zabelis. We went alongside the town dock there. We only spent a couple of hours there. There was a small store, but not much in the way of supplies. So going through some of these areas, you've got to watch what supplies you need, fuel, propane, and food, so that you can't necessarily depend upon being able to replenish those supplies in some of these towns. Now this is going up another one of the inlets towards Tahiti. And we passed another open water fish farm. But then we went down, we're now down in Nuka Sound, and we're a place called Hot Spring Cove. And this is a large touristy area. And so you have boats like this. This is a bed and breakfast tug that has been converted, and it stays there. People can come alongside and have a bed and breakfast. Sometimes I think the tug will actually go out and take groups on eco tours around some of the areas of that part of the world. The dock there is a very good high dock with a floating platform for boats to come alongside. And this boat is here on a permanent basis because this is a fish restaurant. And so you can come over and have a nice fresh fish dinner at the restaurant on that particular location. We then went on further up inside into Barkley Sound, and there was a large waterfall, not large, but a scenic waterfall up at the end of this sound. And so we came up the sound, we anchored or put the dinghy there and enjoyed looking at the waterfall and exploring a bit of the landward area. Then we came down around Tofino. We spent some time here in Tofino. These are all beautiful little anchorages. And we went down around the Pacific Rim National Park to Ucluelet. This part of the world has been favored by Prime Minister Trudeau. He spent, I think, 5 weekends in Tofino last year during the situation. And I think he enjoyed it very much. Very lovely surfing in that area. Around Ucluelet, there is another inlet going up in here, and we anchored inside this inlet of Ucluelet. Another area we're then going to visit was this broken group of islands. Again, a small group of islands where you can just dinghy around the whole area or go up into some of these individual inlets. This inlet goes up to Port Alberni, is it, Judy?
I think so.
Yeah. But this is lovely temperate rainforest area. This is in Ucluelet. We like Ucluelet better than we did Tofino. It was a more interesting town. And this is the kind of bays that they have there. So you can see how it would be extremely good for surfing. This is an eco tour that's located. They've got their whole base on float. While we were there, we saw this tall ship, the schooner, and it had a group of, I think they were teenagers and high school kids that were on it. But both Ucluelet and Tofino are very strong tourist areas. And this is just a lovely view over one of the days at sunset. We played around this Ucluelet boating group, Again, it's beautiful. You could spend a whole summer, a whole season just in this particular part of the world. And that waterfall that we went up was up here in Lucky Creek. We didn't go up Pipestem Island very much because, again, there's no anchoring possible up in that part of the world. But here is Valeda at anchor in one of those nice little bays. This is a beautiful kind of scenery that we have there. And this is that waterfall at going up in April Cove. This little guy, I don't know, he has a small place there that's seasonal, and he might be squatting there. This might be First Nations land or not. But that would be a lovely location to be able to spend a whole summer on one of those islands puttering around. Then we went on down, we stopped in at Port Renfrew. Again, we weren't overly impressed, so we went alongside there. And then we went from there down around, and we finished our tour down here in Esquimalt. And so that is our trip down the west coast of Vancouver Island and down to Esquimalt. So we've done a full circumnavigation of Vancouver Island, but did it the long way. We went way up north and then back and around. And so this is our entrance into Esquimalt. This is the Fiskard Lighthouse. And this is Rod Hill, a former fortress, and that's now a very nice national park. And this is the Navy base in Esquimalt Harbor. Civilian boats are allowed to go into the harbor. As a courtesy, though, you should contact the harbor master and indicate your intentions, whether you're going to go alongside. They have the Royal Canadian Navy Sailing Association has a marina there. And we actually stayed at that marina for several times. But boats are also free to go right up inside the harbor, and you can anchor up inside the Esquimalt Harbor and enjoy that part of the world. So this is overlooking, this is the Navy base, as seen from Rod Hill. And this is the Navy base in operation. So these are some of our city class destroyers here. This resupply ship, I'm not sure if it's one of the original ones like the Protector, or whether that's one of the new ones that came out, the Asterisk. I'm not sure. I don't think that's the Asterisk because it wasn't in operation while we were there. So that is it for Judy and I on our trip through Haida Gwaii and down around the west coast of Vancouver Island. If you have any questions, we're prepared to take questions and answers after this. But if you wish to contact me about anything that we did, you can use this email number. It's SV for sailing vessel, Valeda IV for Valeda 4 at hotmail.com. And we have a website, www.valedaiv.ca. However, on that website, we only have an image and data about our boat. Right now, our boat is down in a place called Puerto Penasco on the northern tip of the Sea of Cortez. It's on the hard. We arrived there last March, almost a year ago, with the idea being to have it shipped up to Chicago. And then from Chicago, we're going to launch it into Lake Michigan and sail it up to our area here in Elliott Lake in the North Channel, just above Manitoulin Island. However, we only got there at the beginning of March. We got it on land. We flew home, hoping that it would then be shipped up to Chicago by May sometime of last year. Well, of course, COVID came in and closed everything down. And so our boat remains on the hard there. We're prepared to sell the boat rather than paying the cost of shipping it all the way to Chicago. So if anybody wants to buy a good Ontario 32 in Mexico, visit this website, www.valeda.ca. Incidentally, these decals that we have on our boom are all the different countries that we visited in Europe. On the other side, we have all the countries we visited in the Bahamas, the Caribbean, and Central America. And you can see this is our bimini that we've got. That was the home that trapped rainwater. So Judy and I are enjoying sailing. We're looking forward to many years. We're hoping to get Haida up here next year. But we're here now, and we'll be quite prepared to answer any questions you have. Okay, over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Aubrey and Judy, for taking us on another trip with you. So it's exciting as always, and we have several expressions of appreciation plus a few questions. Janet is asking, how long did it take you to cross Hecate Strait? Any challenges there?
It was basic, what, about a day and a half?
Yeah.
That's a 24-hour day and a half.
In crossing, it was 130 nautical miles to cross from the tip of Haida Gwaii over to Calvert Island. And so
Well, it was talking the other direction, going to crossing Hecate Strait.
Oh, yes, we crossed over from.
I'm trying to remember the distance now.
Yeah, I don't remember that. Again, it's a bit less.
Yeah, I think it was about 80 miles. So we left late afternoon and arrived the following morning.
We made our original departure from Prince Rupert, going around that area, and then across over to Queen Charlotte City.
And we were very fortunate in our weather. Of course, we also made sure we waited for good weather. It's one of the advantages of living on a boat. You don't have to say, well, we've got to go now because we've only got 2 weeks and then we've got to be back. We could look at it and say, well, we'll wait until conditions permit, until it's favorable to do it.
All right, and now we have more questions coming in. Here's from Drum. Please comment on the crossing of Hecate Strait and the weather that you experienced going south along the coast.
Again, the crossing of Hecate Strait, we waited for decent weather, and there was no problem. Going south along the coast, again, we'd stay. If it looked bad, we wouldn't leave. We'd stay where we were in shelter. We had rain and some fog, so we just rode it out.
Yeah, when we're coasting, it's basically day sailing. We make sure that our distance from one location to another is less than 50 miles. If it's 50 or 60 miles, we look at 50 miles, that's going to take us 10 hours. So we then know, okay, we're going to have to leave very early in the morning in order to get to our next destination before sunset. And so you always want to make sure that you've got your calculations as to how far you want to go.
And it's usually, if it's more than 70 miles, we'll leave in the evening so we arrive the following day. If it's right in that 60, 70 mile range, it's better leaving in the dark because you've already done that entrance when you came in, so you've got some idea of what it's like to leave. It's better to leave in the dark so that you arrive in daylight.
One of the other difficulties, especially in sailing in those northern waters above Cape Caution, is that there aren't a lot of anchorages that you can duck into when things go wrong. So if you have to have a well-founded boat, and you've got to know how long it's going to take you to get to your next destination, and look for alternative anchorages, of which there are very few.
All right, and now we have Stephen. Actually, we have a whole bunch of questions lined up here, just like last time. Stephen says, what kind of resupplying for water, fuel, and food was there going along the west coast of Vancouver Island?
There were towns that had supplies. I tend to oversupply, so the only things we had lots of dried and canned food. Fresh fruit and vegetables, fresh meat, those are the things you run low on, but you can always work around that. That was one of the nice things about the sea asparagus. It was a lovely fresh vegetable that I could find wherever we were, just about. Water, we have a water maker, a reverse osmosis desalinator, and we trap rain. and we use a limited amount. Dishes get rinsed in seawater before they get washed in fresh water, and bathing tends to happen in the ocean. It's not a freshwater thing. Actually, the hardest fuel and propane, we just made sure that we stocked up whenever we were someplace where there was some.
And we also carry, I think we've got 5-gallon jerry cans of fuel that we carry on deck, as well as what we have in our main tank. Propane is the precarious one because we have only one propane tank, and when that goes out, we're in difficulty. So we always, whenever we have the opportunity, we always resupply in both propane and diesel. So we've always got our systems as full as possible. We also have a half decent sized refrigerator, which has a small freezer unit. So we're able to get frozen meats and keep frozen meats for a period of time as well.
Yeah. Our freezer will hold meat for the two of us for 10 days, as long as I buy carefully and package carefully. In many ways, the trickiest thing along all of that coast was finding places to get rid of garbage.
Yes.
Because there are not a lot of places that will let you get rid of it. So we were carrying garbage bags along with us, and on occasion the dinghy was serving as a total on garbage scout.
All right, now we have Lauren asking, what time of the year were you visiting Tassis? And Brenda might be related with her question, asking, when in the year did you make the trip?
This was, it was getting on to August, which is also known in that area as August. So we did have periods of fog. It was July into August.
Yeah, the winds were also light. If anything, they are predominantly northwestern, but the fog is always a problem as well.
And Robert is asking, do you have a list of your stops at each spot of Vancouver Island?
Yes, we do. We'd have to go dig it out. A list of our stops. If Robert would like to send us an email, if he wants the list of exactly where we stopped, we can send it to him. I won't guarantee that we can do it like today, but if he'd send us an email about that, it can get sent to him. I won't try and give it to you verbally now. We couldn't remember them.
We also use the Wagoner's Guide as our major guidebook for it, and of course our GPS.
Great, and I've pasted the email address in the chat box again for everybody to see. And Ken is asking, did you find any plastics on a lot of beaches? Was there all types of plastics? Where was the worst? Did you collect any?
We didn't do that much beach combing as such. So we didn't see great amounts, but there would be bits here and there. And again, if I saw some, I'd pick it up and take it back to the boat and carry it along until I found the next place where I could appropriately get rid of garbage. We certainly never discard plastic waste off the boat. We will, when we are cruising and offshore, organic waste goes into the sea, something will eat it. So food scraps, things like that. If we're out for a very long time, bottles, glass bottles and tin cans will be filled with water and sunk, and paper will get torn up very small. Again, if we're going to be out for so long that we can't carry it with us, this would not be on coastal things. Food scraps will go over when we're coastal cruising. Glass, metal, and paper only if we are doing a major ocean passage where we just can't carry it with us. We do only have 32 feet of boat. Another
limitation is there are very few pump out facilities for discharging waste. And unfortunately, we have it going directly into the ocean because there are so few spots where we can have enough time to get it properly pumped out.
And now we have Cristobal asking, did you sail the boat to Mexico?
Yes. One, two, three, several years ago now, I won't put numbers on without doing arithmetic. We left from Esquimalt, and after a few glitches, sailed down along the American coast and down to along the Mexican coast, down around the Cabo San Lucas, up into the Sea of Cortez, and then down to Central America, all the way down to El Salvador, El Salvador and to Costa Rica, and then sailed from there back up to Puerto Penasco.
Yeah, we left our boat for a season in Bahia del Sol in El Salvador. We at one point in time we were thinking of going through the Panama Canal and sailing back up the Caribbean. However, Judy has, I think, exhausted herself from long distance passageway canal, and so we opted to come back up to Puerto Penasco and put it on a flatbed truck and ship it over to Chicago. And then from there, we'll sail it back up to the North Channel whenever the borders open up and permit us to do that. And then we'll just keep our boat up here in the North Channel. Because of the three most beautiful cruising areas that we've come across have been the North Channel above Manitoulin Island, the North Shore of Lake Superior, and the BC and Alaska coast on the West Coast. Most beautiful areas in the world.
Well, I have a bit of a bias towards the Caribbean. I like being warm, but
all right, and this brings us to the end of the presentation. We still have more questions that are unanswered, so I encourage everybody to get in touch with Judy and Aubrey to get your answers after the session. Aubrey and Judy, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. As always, it's great to have you here. And everybody who attended, thank you for coming out and joining the Vancouver International Boat Show, sponsored by Freedom Marine International Yacht Sales in Vancouver. Please be sure to check out all the features we have online, like the info booth, and I hope you have a great boat show.